Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Cormack, and I chose my senior thesis project to be human trafficking on a global scale. So, with that, human trafficking is a wicked problem that just does not seem to be solvable or reduced. It has been around for as long as mankind has recorded history, from the Egyptian dynasties to the Roman Empire to the British Empire to the United States and even current day China. So, you'd say, how do we approach this wicked problem? Well, the research chosen are from my three areas of concentration. They are organizational leadership, general business, and military studies. These areas of concentration fall under the disciplines I have chosen to conduct my research. The first discipline is political science. All three of my concentrations tie into this: organizational leadership through government influence, general business showing how human trafficking is a business, and military studies that defines how militaries use human trafficking to assert their power. The second discipline I chose is social work. This discipline relates to organizational leadership through social services that are available to deter human trafficking and to aid human trafficking victims. One could argue that military studies is linked with social work as well. From my experience in the military, we dealt with human trafficking when we were in Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, and the United States along the southwest border. Conclusion: the interdisciplinary methods, area of concentration, and research will show that human trafficking is on a global scale and is a problem that is being addressed, but with much conflict if ever resolving the problem. So, human trafficking on a global scale. What is human trafficking? Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Labor trafficking, modern day slavery. Labor trafficking includes situations of debt, bondage, forced labor, and involuntary child labor, and that's per the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Types of labor trafficking includes domestic servants, farm workers, and factory workers. These are prevalent across the world and even still exist in the United States today. Sex trafficking is defined by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. Most of us know it as sex trafficking. Sex trafficking happens all around us. It is in massage parlors, strip clubs, online websites, underground brothels, gangs, cartels, and in many other different places. In order to fully begin to understand human trafficking, we must use Repco's first step of defining the problem. Human trafficking is a problem that deals with labor and sex trafficking. Millions of women, men, and children are victims of the traffickers. Use of tactics to lure and or force victims. Some of these tactics are violence, manipulation, and false promises of a better life. Traffickers look for people that are from countries and or cultures that are uneconomically unstable, have economic hardship, are emotionally unstable, and are not protected by family or their culture. So why should we care about human trafficking? Human trafficking is a world problem that directly violates human rights. Using the social worker approach, I researched the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, which is located with the United Nations, that was started in 1966. It is the lead office in the world for spreading knowledge and facts about human trafficking. Their core areas to address human trafficking are the following: the primacy of human rights, preventing trafficking, protection and assistance, and the criminalization of punishment and redress. So, in addition to the approach to this problem, one to try to research, analyze, problem solve, and find conclusions to a complex problem, one must look at the problem from different disciplines and points of view. Human trafficking is a complex problem that is definitely wicked in nature. It is political issues throughout the world. The OHCHR is a world organization that is the social work realm. Many organizations across the world use social work to address this problem. This discipline is a leader in addressing the problem, but has not been able to stop it by itself. Some countries do not address human trafficking, but instead promote it. I recently was in Dominican Republic in Punta Cana, and prostitution was legal, and everywhere I went, there was Russian, actually, mafia or mob guys that were sitting there trying to offer women left and right from across the world. So that was a very different perspective to see that when I was traveling last month. But from a political science perspective, regions of Africa are devastated, and the use of child labor as soldiers keeps increasing in countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo. And a recent UN report verified that 8,521 children were used as soldiers as recently as 2020, while another 2,674 children were killed and 5,748 injured in various conflicts. According to some estimates, up to 40% of child soldiers are in Africa. So, literature review. Looking into each discipline for research is a great way to understand the problem, learn insights, and narrow the scope of the problem. The political science side of human trafficking searches brought up a lot of political science papers researching human traffic. I did, however, find an interesting article concerning Russia and modern-day slavery. Here's an excerpt from that. In Russia, where an estimated 1 million people are living in what's known as modern slavery, the politicized nature of human trafficking is also evident, but deployed differently, as the Russian government has made the task of assisting trafficking victims as a political one. From its policy of silence on human trafficking, the passage of a number of laws aimed at closing shelters that assist trafficking victims, and the promotion of government-sponsored media that politicize trafficking, it is clear that the Russian government views human trafficking as layered in political controversies. Russia did not make human trafficking illegal until 2003. Keep in mind, Russia is one of the biggest nations in the world, a key player in the world decisions, and we're one of the last of the group of 8 to make it illegal. Researching organizational leadership showed that there are many organizations have been formed to combat human trafficking. There are also organizations that have made it a point to recognize human trafficking in their business. The McCain Institute focus is, we are committed to driving systematic change and implementing comprehensive, action-based solutions to prevent and end all forms of slavery. There is an organization called Texas Business Against Trafficking, TBAT. In 2016, the Secretary of State established a Human Trafficking Prevention Business Partnership under the Texas Government Code and Administrative Code 90. The Texas business can work together in sharing training resources, best practices, and information to help combat human trafficking. This is an organization that spreads knowledge between partners and businesses about human trafficking and to help identify in the workplace. Next, I chose to research human trafficking with the social work discipline. Preliminary research showed a lot of jobs and training for social workers across the world and the United States to combat human trafficking and to help aid victims of human trafficking. A simple search on ZipRecruiter pulled 159,765 plus human trafficking social worker jobs in the United States. David Ulrich, a professor in the School of Social Work, founded the Center of Human Trafficking Research and Outreach in 2021 as an interdisciplinary resource in the global fight against human trafficking, supported by over $23 million in funding from the United States Department of State. He works to improve how researchers measure human trafficking and how governments and other entities respond to the problem. This article is a great read about the confusion of human trafficking. Many think of it only as sex trafficking and forget that there is a huge business in labor trafficking. He discusses the issues of identifying victims, as many are afraid to come forward. In 2004, while I was serving in Iraq, KBR, which is Kellogg, Brown & Root, was awarded a contract to support our forward operating bases with life support in Iraq. Their workers were from different nations, workers from Philippines, Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, to name a few. Remember a case where 12 Nepali men were kidnapped and murdered by insurgents while being transported to Iraq to the base they were going to work at. In their 2008 lawsuit, the plaintiffs accused Houston-based KBR and its Jordanian subcontractor, Daoud and Partners, of recruiting victims in Nepal by promising them jobs at a luxury hotel in Amman, which is in Jordan, only to send them to Iraq instead. This civil case was dismissed and KBR was not prosecuted over this. From my experience working with workers from other countries that worked for KBR, they all stated they were promised jobs in Kuwait, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, and other countries that were not in the combat zone, and then they ended up in the combat zone with us. This is an example of false promise human trafficking for labor. Can trafficking human be considered a violation of basic rights of victims, and that would be considered a crime against humanity? I believe that the political science and social work disciplines make it relevant, and it would be justified as a crime. Just a few excerpts, like local. In the Houston area, a woman was charged and sentenced to 24 months in prison for obstructing the enforcement of federal crime sex trafficking statute. And what she was doing was she was a kind of like a safe house, but not a safe house for for the people being human trafficked, a safe house for how it was filtered through. So she was being given young girls that were under 18, and she would house them, she would feed them, but then she would also push them out as escorts for men who wanted sexual favors. So she was caught. She was 24 months in prison. Another one was Mexican nationals charged with offenses stemming from smuggling and labor traffic. That's what we dealt with on the border. Um, Working in restaurants back in the day, I remember guys that worked for me, and I would ask them how much it cost them just for them to get across the border, and it was like minimum $5,000, and then they would give another like 20 for their three family members or whatever, or four, and then the smugglers would take their money and not bring their family members across. So it's a business. It's not good business, but it's a business. But these show labor and sex trafficking that social workers deal with. One victim was being transported around for sexual acts for money. The other article is about smuggling people across the border in exchange for money, property, or people. Once they crossed the border, they were not free to go in the U.S., but they were forced into labor and sex trafficking. Human trafficking is a stain on our society's conscience and affront to the ideals that form the basis of our national strength: liberty, justice, equality, and opportunity. These aberrant crimes against targets the most vulnerable in society and exploits them and their labors, stealing away their God-given rights, freedom, and dignity. At the same time, it erodes the safety of our communities, the security of our borders, the strength of our economy, and the rule of law. And my administration is committed to keeping the fight in human trafficking at the forefront of our national security agenda. This was most recently from President Biden in 2021. He issued a national action plan to combat human trafficking. It outlined what human trafficking is, the numbers in globally and in the U.S., and the mission of the U.S. to combat it, an action plan, and the executive orders issued over the years to sustain action against human trafficking. This shows a political science discipline being used to try and solve the wicked problem of human trafficking. Action is being taken, but the problem does not seem to go away. There are many insights into human trafficking. The problem has been analyzed by the United Nations and the United States government, and at the United Nations with the OHCHR guys, and the White House issuing plans of action and recommended principles and guidelines on human rights and human trafficking. I have found literature ranging from personal experience in military studies, political articles, and political science, many social worker articles, organizations that show organizational leadership, and business organizations that links business to identify and prevent human trafficking in the workforce. Each literature researched have shown how the disciplines connect in an interdisciplinary manner. For example, the politics with the Russian government not making human trafficking illegal until 2003, which is a year after the formation of the OHCHR at the United Nations, which Russia is a member of. The problem is being addressed by multiple organizations. The problem still remains complex in nature. Business is a main driving force in human trafficking. A business can save money by having forced labor that is not paid or paid very little. They would also save money by doing business in countries that do not have laws preventing human trafficking. However, businesses still operate in human trafficking in countries that have laws in place combating human trafficking. So identify the conflicts and insights. A major conflict in human trafficking between disciplines would be business and social work. The social work discipline is dedicated to human rights and preventing human trafficking. The business side is dedicated to making the most money at the least cost, even if it means using labor trafficking or sex trafficking to make the money. One organization that disrupts human trafficking business is United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. So the role of ICE, here's an excerpt from their site. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforces, ICE, is a leader in the global fight against human trafficking, proactively identifying, disrupting, and dismantling cross-border human trafficking organizations and minimizing the risk they pose to national security and public safety. Through Homeland Security investigations and enforcement and removal operations, a victim-centered approach is used, placing equal value on the identification and stabilization of victims and on deterrence, investigation, and prosecution of traffickers. Another conflict identified is the battle in politics. This puts conflicts between social work and political science. In 2018, President Trump used ICE to combat immigration by stating they were there combating human trafficking. This led to victims not coming forward because of fear of deportation. Therefore, they continue to be trafficked in labor, sex, or both. When an immigrant is detained, it takes time to identify if they are being trafficked. ICE was charged with speeding up the deportation process, so many that were being trafficked were deported and put back in the mix, to later be trafficked again. Here's a statement from an attorney in El Paso that was representing detained immigrants. As an attorney, I've represented dozens of survivors of human trafficking. I've seen firsthand how current immigration policies are hurting efforts to stop the heinous crime. Just this month, my office sought to consult with a client, a detained survivor of human trafficking. He had, without our knowledge, already been deported. And that was from you. That's the name of the attorney. So, creating common ground and insights. There is common ground between the identified disciplines, and my areas of study, military studies, links with social work, organizational leadership, and political science. Social work links with general business, organizational leadership, political science, and military studies. General business links with organizational leadership and political science. Let's look at some of the research done that shows these links. ICE is an organization that is under the Department of Homeland Security. This organization has leadership that has responsibility to the government of the United States. It also is an organization that uses social service to provide care and support to immigrants while waiting for processing and either be deported or granted entrance into the U.S. Many of those detained are victims of human trafficking. This crosses political science and social work. They are linked to combat human trafficking, so they have common ground. The U.S. military has been used to combat human trafficking across the globe. In the U.S., they have been used to provide surveillance and assist the United States Customs and Border Protection, CBP, in their mission to secure the southern border. While doing this mission, they were also used to identify human trafficking. U.S. Northern Command mission is NORTHCOM, is supporting the Department of Homeland Security and its operational component, U.S. Customs and Border, by providing mission-enhancing capabilities to secure the border and stop the flow of human trafficking, illegal drugs, contraband, criminals, and illegal immigration into the country. U.S. NORTHCOM's mission-enhancing supports enables CBP to conduct their law enforcement mission efficiently and to support DHS efforts to manage border security and immigration processes. That was from NORTHCOM 2023. This is an example of military studies, social work, and political science being linked to combat human trafficking. Businesses, whether they knowingly or unknowingly are engaged in human trafficking, are responsible for their actions. There's another excerpt. Existing businesses have a stake in slavery. Whether they like it or not, they do. They may unknowingly pull from first or second level suppliers that use slave labor, or they may own establishments or employ persons that come into direct contact with both traffickers and survivors. That is from the United States Department of State HEROES Program 2023. Businesses, organizational leadership, social work, and political science are intersected with this statement. Texas formed an organization to link businesses together to combat human trafficking. This shows that businesses are linked with social work discipline and the political science discipline. So, conclusion, human trafficking is a subject, complex and wicked problem we all have. Even if we do not realize it, one way or another we have been affected by it, from the clothes we buy and wear to the food we, apologies, my screen switched on me. From the clothes we buy and wear to the food cooked for us in a restaurant. There are many ways that human trafficking is accepted without even knowing it exists in our lives personally and professionally. With all the research I have done, it has become apparent to me that human trafficking is a serious problem, but does have the world's attention in the majority of countries. Unfortunately, we still allow it to exist. So, reflection. Solutions to the human trafficking problem has to be looked at on a global scale. It has to be taken into account the politics and businesses that would be able to deter it or would continue in aiding it for their benefit. Why do politicians choose what is humane and is not? The world is a big place with a lot of population. China is now approaching a billion people while the U.S. is at 332 million. Is it wrong to think that people have become a resource that is not that is no longer thought as humane in some countries. Through the research I did, I found that even Russia was one of the last big 8 countries to make human trafficking illegal. In a few weeks, I'm traveling to Pucano. Well, I've already done that travel, so I explained that to you and told you what I saw. It was interesting to see that it was legalized and had Russian, like pimps, as you would call it, standing there. But overall, I believe human trafficking has its challenges being stopped. It is a wicked problem. I do not think it will ever be solved, but awareness and understanding all countries can help lower the amount of people being trafficked. The population keeps growing, and the demand for money, land, and space and quality of life just gets tighter. This means that people will still pay for privileges, even if those providing are doing it with labor or sex trafficking. So that concludes my human trafficking. Hope you enjoyed and got a lot of education from it. Thank y'all, and go tech, graduate this semester.